All right, welcome. My name is Jeff Maggioncalda, and I'm here with one of our favorite colleagues, Barb Oakley. And I think we're going to kind of reveal, well, Barb's going to reveal some of her secrets as to how she became sort of a phenomenon on Coursera. And we've kind of planned this out, so I have a couple of introductory remarks to sort of set the stage, and then Barb's going to give you some of her wisdom. So that's 1974. And it was a very different world. I grew up in Pacifica, California. We had one phone, and there was a wire connecting it to the outlet. We had one screen. It was a black and white TV. And we had no computers, because they didn't really exist for families like ours. And we didn't even have a calculator. So we had no computing devices other than pencil and paper. And the state of the world at the time was similar to what Michael Moe said in his keynote, which is the expectation is, you're born, you play, you learn, you work, you retire. He didn't say it, but then you die. And then it's really changed since then. It's really gone to a world where things are changing so quickly that the expectation is you're going to have to be a lifelong learner, and you're going to be working and learning at the same time. And to a large degree, your success in your job and maybe in your life will depend upon how well you learn. And so I'm here with an expert on learning, Barb Oakley. But I thought I'd maybe set the stage a little bit and then turn it over to Barb. So Michael Moe put up this slide. I saw it first in a book by Tom Friedman, Thank You for Being Late. Last week we had our Coursera annual partners conference in London, and Tom was one of the keynote speakers. And the point that he makes on this slide, which he borrowed from Google, is that technology is changing at an exponential rate. Human adaptability is growing more at a linear rate, and we're now at a point where we're having trouble keeping up. And what he prescribes to be the key is to learn faster and to govern smarter. And I think a lot of the science of learning faster is taught by Barb in Barb's course, Learning How to Learn. When we look at the global context, there are about 300 million people that will be entering the workforce in the next 10 years, and these are not spread evenly. About 100 million people in India, 60 million people in China, 40 million in Brazil, and 100 million rest of world. And this is happening at a time when the jobs that folks do in these different economies are at risk of being automated or impacted, maybe eliminated in certain cases by technology. And when you look at which kinds of jobs are the ones that will be most impacted, it is absolutely a disparate impact. So McKinsey did a study in 2018 that looked at the relationship between wages, the risk of automation, and the level of education attained. And what you see when you look at along these axes, the size of the dot is the number of jobs. The color of the dot is the level of formal education. So red is no more than, no high school education. This is less than high school. The blue is some college degree. But you can see that there are a lot of jobs that will be deeply impacted by education, and these are held by the lowest skilled, by automation, the lowest skilled, low wage folks. And so I think getting more access to skills and skill training, and even the skills on how to learn, is really essential. When we look across our platform, we try to make the best courses, the best thinking available to everybody. The way that we do that is by creating a learning ecosystem. So Coursera, you can think of us as a platform that connects learners and educators and employers. Today we have about 40 million learners who come to Coursera to learn and prosper. They are coming for education from top universities and industry partners. We have 190 now. They come to Coursera to teach the world. But this is really the genesis of Coursera, was universities starting putting up courses. It attracted a lot of learners. Because there were a lot of learners, more universities put up more courses. We now have 3,200 courses. We now have 14 degrees, and it's a flourishing platform for folks to publish to this world of learners. About 3 years ago, we also started selling our partners' courses into the workplace. So companies are upskilling their employees, and they're using platforms like Coursera to do that. And then finally, a couple and a half years ago, we launched Coursera for Business. We now have 1,800 companies around the world who are using our partners' courses and content to teach their employees new skills. mostly in the topics of business technology and data science. But where that places Coursera is at a pretty interesting vantage point where we can see across a world of learners, with our top 5 countries represented are the US, followed by India, China, Mexico, Brazil. We have a lot of the top universities, very engaging courses, and now we're also starting to see what's happening in the workplace. So we kind of see a lot from where we stand. And one of the most interesting phenomena of what we've seen is Barb Oakley. So Barb launched her course in 2014, Learning How to Learn. We didn't know what to expect. It now has attracted more than 2 million learners across 190 countries. In every year since it's been launched, it's been one of the top 10 courses on Coursera. And it is amazing. There's like a fan club. Maybe you'll talk all about it, I'm sure. But it is really a phenomenon. I think it's a phenomenon, a movement, which is just so timely. In a world where people need to learn for the rest of their lives, learning how to learn might be the most important skill people can acquire. And Barb has done more work than anybody on Coursera, at least, in helping people do that. So I'd like to now welcome Barb Oakley and have her share some of her wisdom on how she's done this. Barb?
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. It's one thing I'd like to say is I'm a professor of engineering at Oakland University, and Oakland University is in Michigan. So this is me going to work at my usual day job in February. And learning how to learn, I teach this course with Terry Sinowski, who's the Francis Crick professor at the Salk Institute. And this is Terry going to work at his day job. So I think one thing that people sometimes forget is they talk about students coming together from all over the world. But actually, professors as well can come from very different backgrounds and create new material that people really find useful. So, to my shock, I was invited to speak at Harvard. I was a nervous wreck because, it's Harvard. And then I walked into the room and I was even more surprised because the room was packed, standing room only. And I thought, why are there so many people here? And it turns out that our one little course, made for less than $5,000, mostly in my basement, had on the order of the same number of students as all of Harvard's massive open online courses and online courses put together, made for millions of dollars with hundreds of people. And so I think this tells you 2 very important things. One, that Harvard's courses aren't as good as those on Coursera.
That wasn't in the script.
But actually it is quite true, I think. And but the other thing is, it tells you that people are starved for fresh approaches to learning that are well-grounded in science, but are practically useful, that you can walk away with something that you can use. So the online world is a very interesting one. It's highly competitive. It's a mixture of academia with Silicon Valley and mixed together with a little bit of Hollywood. And there's actually nothing wrong with that, despite the professors who say our job is not to entertain. In fact, people really love it. And I'll give you a little example of that. This is our older daughter, Rosie, and she did a little short video snippet, and she was modeling what it's like to block out sound in order to focus better. So she was willing to look a little dorky. She has a great big pair of earphones that happen to be on her lap. Well, at that time, she was actually a third-year medical school student. And so she, about 4 months after the class came out, she went in and she was sitting there, and her professor was a preeminent engineer. Oh, I don't know why this is wanting to go forward despite my best efforts. But she was a medical school student, and so her professor was a preeminent cardiologist in Southeast Michigan. And she went to class, and she was just sitting there, and her professor suddenly stops the class, points right at her, and says, "Oh, you're the girl in the MOOC." And so here's this very distinguished professor of cardiology who was actually watching these videos and taking this MOOC because he was getting a lot out of it professionally. So this gives you a sense of the great impact that high quality online learning can have. So I'd like to just give you just a little bit of a snippet of some of our latest work in learning how to learn. This one is our newest MOOC that we've put out. And I'd like to just take you for a few moments deep inside the brain. And here, what you'll see is that the brain's fundamental building block is the neuron. There's about 100 billion of them. And I wish you could look at your faces right now. You can see that you're just going, oh my word, this is where she gets to the super boring scientific stuff. But so let's spice things up a little bit. Let's use a metaphor for a neuron to help explain things. And this is a space alien. And the space alien has legs. And those are analogous to the dendrites on a real neuron. There's toes on each of the legs, a lot of toes. It's a space alien. And those are analogous to dendritic spines. And then the space alien has this kind of arm that reaches out. And that's analogous in real life to the axon of the neuron. And what neurons, as space aliens, do is they like to reach out, and they reach out and with their hand, they tickle the toe of the next neuron. And so that's what neurons do. They reach out and they send a signal along from one neuron to the next neuron. It's a sort of an electrical signal. So of course, we do know that it's a little bit more complicated than that. In reality, we've got neurotransmitters. There's a lot of sophistication as the signal is propagating along. But since I'm an electrical engineer, we'll just call it an electrical signal and have done with it there. So when you learn anything new, you are just creating a connection between neurons. So let's say that you learn how to conjugate a verb, or how to take a derivative in math, or you learn how to do a dance step. You're just creating a connection between certain neurons. And the more you practice, the more you develop a stronger link between those two neurons. Now, as you're practicing, you can almost think of it as you're developing these sets of links where as you practice, those links get richer and stronger. Now, if you don't practice, what happens is, let's say you hear a professor and you understood it when the professor was speaking in class. But then you waited 2 weeks to review your notes. And when you review your notes, all of a sudden, you don't understand what you understood before. What's happening is in those intervening 2 weeks, because you didn't use those links, your little synaptic janitor can sweep those links away. Now, what I find very interesting about this is a very simple presentation, but in all great likelihood, you have never actually seen this kind of simple presentation of how actually simple it is to learn and why practice is important. And so I think conveying these kinds of ideas through really good online learning can be invaluable for people. So I want to actually bring you to my greatest hero in sports, who's a fellow by the name of Julius Jago. Now, Julius was from Kenya, and if you know anything about Kenya, it's famous for its long-distance runners. But Julius had no desire to be a long-distance runner. He wanted to throw the javelin. So there's no javelin throwing coaches in Kenya. What could he do? He couldn't afford to get a coach. So he went to YouTube, and he learned each day. He'd watch the videos from YouTube, go out and practice, learn again, go out and practice. And with only a tiny bit of coaching at the very end, he won the world champion in javelin throwing. So I think what this reveals is that you can learn a lot from really good, well-made videos. They can be fantastic in helping provide instruction. Sometimes it makes me a little bit irritated because I'll hear about online instruction. I'll hear, well, you know, students tend to focus on the videos, but we've got really engaging platforms. We've got all sorts of peer involvement, discussion forums, and so forth. But what was the first sentence? People really focus on the videos. And that's true. So in learning how to learn, what we tried to do was put a real focus on creating great videos along with the other support mechanisms such as discussion forums and peer evaluation. I want to just bring your attention to something that I think is valuable, and that relates to theories of how we learn. So don't worry, it's just like one slide here. So the amount of direct instruction you have, constructivists feel that student-centered is really the only way that students learn. And then direct instruction, of course, is the instructor providing all sorts of information. So you can have low student-centered, in other words, it's student-centered instruction, or you can have high sort of direct instruction. So that's the professor up there talking. Now, let's just kind of juxtapose this with what's going on as far as evolutionary perspectives on people learn. And again, this is the only slide like this. So if you look at the type of material being learned, there's a difference between biologically primary, that's like stuff that's easy for us, like learning a first language, or learning how to identify people's faces. I mean, babies do not have to take a class in how do you recognize your mother's face, even though it's really complex. We are geared for that. This is contrasted with what's called biologically secondary material. Our brains, for most people, are just not geared to do things like learn advanced mathematics. These kinds of subjects are actually, we've got to repurpose other circuits, and it's harder for us. Now, there is evidence that the more the subject matter kind of gets away from the easier biologically primary material and towards the secondary, harder to learn material, the more direct instruction plays an important role. It's not the only role. You do want to have active learning and breaks and so forth, but it's important and it's valuable. And this is part of why really well-made MOOCs that have excellent direct instruction as a major component of that MOOC can be a very valuable thing. And just to give you a little bit of a research background, there's over 6,000 citations to a paper that says, Why Minimal Guidance During Instruction Does Not Work, an analysis of the failure of constructivist discovery, problem-based, experiential, and inquiry-based teaching. So it just lends viability. I mean, constructivism is not the be-all and end-all. It's helpful, but it's not everything. So let's just change the subject a little bit. So I published a book, and you may not know this, but in the publishing industry, you are not allowed to pick the title of your book. So I had a book is coming out from Penguin Random House. Great, okay. And then they titled the book, A Mind for Numbers. Can you think of a more boring title for a book? I was like, okay, well, this is it. I'm just out of luck here. And but the book came out at the same time as the massive open online course, Learning How to Learn. Pro tip from someone who's been there. Name your book and your MOOC the same thing. It's helpful. But anyway, so I was invited a couple months after the book and the MOOC came out. I was invited to be on Science Friday with Ira Flato. And I was invited on with Ben Carey, who is a New York Times journalist who had just also had a book published on learning. And of course, you know me, I was a nervous wreck. Here I am on this big show with a New York Times journalist, and I'm sure that, you know, he's just gonna kind of dominate the entire discussion. And so we get to talking beforehand, and of course he's talking about the New York Times, and I just get to talking about this little MOOC that we have with Coursera. And, mentioning what's going on, and I begin to realize Ben Carey is the one who's nervous. And sure enough, my book has way outsold his book. So what that tells you is that MOOCs can actually have more impact than the New York Times. It's pretty amazing. So I think, every Friday I send out a Cheery Friday email. It goes out to 1.5 million people around the world. So you know how sometimes you're a little hesitant before pressing send? So every Friday I'm like, is it good? Don't hit a bump in the road when I'm driving or something like that, which I did once. My husband was driving and I hit the send, so it became a Cheery Thursday email. But I think in kind of wrapping up my quick thoughts here for everyone, I believe it's important that I also bring up something that online learning can create problems. And so I think I should talk about the downside. And the downside is the fan letters. I mean, they're actually great, but when you get a lot of them, they can be a little overwhelming. And so that's just a little very quick overview on learning how to learn. And back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Barb. So we did actually design this to have quite a bit of time for Q&A. I mean, Barb, you've had so much experience across our partners. The amount that universities are now staffing up their centers for teaching and learning, and they're building like MOOC production machines. That they're realizing that this idea that online's over here and on campus is over here is it's just not really the way things are going to be. They're realizing that while there will be people who are just online, almost all the on-campus learners are also going to be online. I mean, my youngest daughter is at Duke, and when she was in high school when the iPhone came out, and they just have learned a totally different way with a lot of digital. So kind of everybody's kind of moving towards digital teaching, even if it is blended. We thought it'd be really useful to open it up for questions. I thought I might start with a first question, which is not the one that we actually talked about. But as I sit here,
okay, now I'm unprepared.
I think there's a really big kind of question out there that surfaces in different ways, which is the idea of microlearning. Microlearning. A lot of people would say, you know what? People's attention spans just aren't very long anymore. And so I've heard one person say, any learning that takes more than 5 minutes, forget it. It's not going to work. And I have to believe that the neurobiology doesn't quite support that. Now, that might be people's interest and it might be the limits of certain people's attention span, but it doesn't mean that that's where we should go. And I'm kind of already giving my biased answer, but what are your thoughts on sort of long form, short form, and things in between?
There's some, actually, this is building on some excellent research coming from Stanford. But there was an analysis done of videos and what length of videos people would watch. And surprisingly enough, what they found was, sure enough, people will watch 5-minute videos and then they'll walk away. But then they come back. So they'll take a little break and come back. And actually, talking with one of the producers for Crash Course, which is one of YouTube's biggest sort of science-based shows, they told me that YouTube is moving to 20 to 25-minute videos because that's what the market is looking for. They're looking for longer videos. And sometimes I think the mistake I see universities making is they're told 5-minute videos are the best. Yeah. So what they'll do is they'll take an hour-and-a-half lecture and they'll cut it up into 5-minute videos, and then so you just have to, it's not like they constructed it as individual 5-minute videos. And sure enough, if you're doing some kind of large-scale derivation involving entropy, you just can't cut that into 5-minute snippets. But it turns out that's okay. So I think for good education, we're doing just fine to provide something that's at least on the order of 20 to 25 minutes. People can handle that. I do have to say that along with MOOCs, I agree with you that books are really good at helping you build and focus your attention. And also, of course, as we teach in Learning How to Learn, the Pomodoro Technique, which is invented by the Italian Francesco Cirillo, I hear from more people that they find that incredibly productive. It's the Pomodoro Technique. Just look that up if you, and there's some great apps that do it, but it can really help you keep your focus, learn to build your focus so that it lasts longer.
Great. Let me open it up to so thank you, Barb. Let me open it up to the group here, people who probably are maybe curious, maybe they're some of your learners, maybe they're producing MOOCs, would be interested to hear questions from the floor. Yeah.
Thank you so much for everything you have done. Thank you so much for everything you have done for the world. You are phenomenal, and your blessings have even reached to other countries where I had to be the facilitator of some MOOCs, some MOOCs from like the one about entrepreneurship introductions and others. The only challenge that I had to facilitate with the same group in English, it was for girls at University of Baghdad in Iraq. I was working for the US Department of State, and MOOC was one of the things that we spread around the universities over there. So I have two things. One thing is a comment to let you know that the girls at the university who were like jobless, who didn't have any future, they thought so. They learned how to have income while they're at home from following some of these courses on entrepreneurship. And I had every once in a while, I bring entrepreneurs to talk to them along the side, so to make them more entertaining. The only thing they needed someone to facilitate follow-up. By the end of the course, I only awarded those who finished with an email from you with certificate, that they got certificate from the embassy to congratulate them. So that's one thing. The other thing, it's been over 2 years since I worked on MOOCs, on MOOC, so I don't know, is there anything for our kids? I am asking as a parent, and I'm also asking as a professional involved in the educational system in San Diego, because our kids sometimes need those few minutes to learn and keep them up even during summer break. Thank you so much, and bless you.
Oh, thank you. Well, it just so happens that we have that brand new MOOC that we've that Coursera has just put out is Learning How to Learn for Youth. And it is directly geared, it's a sort of a shorter, more fast-paced, more just really up to the minute, great animations and visuals, some of which you've seen here, and it's directly oriented for kids. So take a look at that. I think you'll be very pleased.
I'm excited. I can't wait to see that.
Great. Yeah, other questions?
Again, to echo the sentiment, thank you very much for the excellent course. I'm asking on behalf of people that don't necessarily have access to online learning. I've seen the power of the course. I was one of the students that took it. And I'm wondering whether there are any opportunities, for instance, on even training educators, like training trainers, so that we can begin to integrate this into the classroom. So this exists as something that's out there, and I think for the majority of the world that don't have access to internet and technology tools to be able to benefit from this. The knowledge is out there, but there's still a lot of barriers to accessing it. Have you given some thought into that? Maybe we're putting too much demand on your time, but has there been some thought around how we can bring a course like this towards the marginalized communities? Thank you.
I think there are two questions here, really. One relates to teaching the teachers, and the second that relates to outreach. So I'll handle the first. And so it just so happens I'm working on a book now for teachers about how to teach in accordance with how students really learn and what we know from neuroscience. And so actually, I haven't mentioned this, but I'm planning to do a MOOC on that, and I'm hoping Coursera might have an interest in it.
Sounds good. Now, we have a lot of governments now who are actually hiring Coursera to make our courses available to their citizens, and in many cases, their educational infrastructure. Because obviously teaching teachers how to teach students how to learn effectively, there's a lot of leverage there. Yeah.
I think so. So that's the next thing I'm working on. And as far as outreach,
yeah, we have various programs trying to get access to this content. 3,200 courses. How do you get in the hands of as many people around the world as possible? The internet's moving quickly. Adoption of mobile phones is moving quickly. I can tell you what we have right now, and we continue to invest in this, is the ability to watch courses on a mobile phone, the ability to download courses onto your mobile phone so that you can watch it offline. And when you go back online, and maybe it's a Wi-Fi hotspot and not your data plan, it does all the synchronization. We'll continue to do that. I don't know, we don't have any immediate plans to figure out technologically how to provide MOOCs in an environment where there's no device that has ever had a connection to the internet. I can certainly see, we're talking to some correctional facilities where they don't have internet access inside of, say, a prison, but they can download courses onto an iPad, and you can take these courses offline, and when they come back on, you can sync them up. So I do think that you don't have to be connected all the time, but I think we are not going to be able to, in the near term, build MOOCs that can exist without some connection to the internet at some point. So we're going to kind of wait for the internet to keep moving and for mobile phones to keep advancing. Yeah?
So yes, also obviously, thank you. I wanted to ask, you talk about teachers and learning how to learn, but you also talked about somebody learning how to throw a javelin off of YouTube, and I was curious, both of you, what place you think sort of inexpert content has, content created by people who are not educators, who are putting out videos like how to throw a javelin on YouTube or wherever else, and how that plays into, I guess, this future.
I think that to some extent, let's say that, what am I? I'm a professor of engineering. I'm not a professor of education. So who am I to make a course like this? But yet, there really aren't professors of education who are providing practically useful material that is profoundly growing in a profound sense from neuroscience. There's just no one out there that has done that. So I think there's a good place for people who are experts within or who are able to bring multidisciplinary perspectives to what they're doing. In fact, Thomas Kuhn wrote the famous book, Structures of Scientific Revolution. And what he found was that real innovation in science takes place due to two different types of groups of people. One is they're really young, so they haven't yet been indoctrinated into how they're supposed to look at the discipline. But the second is are people who are originally trained in something completely different. And they bring their insights from this different discipline as they're beginning to learn in whatever they're grappling with as the new discipline. So I think there's definitely a place for people of many different backgrounds to bring good insights to the world via online.
Yeah, I guess my thought is that a lot of having people spend their attention and focus on a topic for a long period of time is having them feel engaged and maybe even relating to the person presenting. So I think the variation in delivery is really valuable. I know there's a lot of studies that show that people are more likely to feel confident that they could learn something if they're learning from somebody who they feel is similar to them. It's a little separate from the actual subject matter. I do think there's a risk, like with news, when you start blurring opinion from facts, you could sort of just run around in circles and maybe in the wrong direction. So ideally what you'd have is some research-based fundamental substance that is efficient and grounded in evidence, delivered by a whole host of voices that can connect with and speak with lots of people. And I think the learner's going to have to figure out, as with news, how they discriminate from sources that are kind of just making stuff up versus other sources. And that's why, like with this intentional learning thing, if you really want to learn something, there are a number of approaches, and deliberate practice is a really big one. It's a more efficient way to learn that is definitely not in a lot of the material that people purport to be good learning material. But if it were, I think people would learn a bit faster. Yeah.
Hi. I'm wondering what you feel about these hybrid courses, the role of online learning in residential university settings, what flipping the classroom means in 2019, and then I guess as a sort of a subtext of that, what in particular is the most valuable thing that can happen online, and are there methodologies or use of technologies that are more or less effective?
Oh. So we can both, would you like to go first?
No,
so I began my journey into the online world by just flipping my class and making videos, little videos. And it was very effective. So I think there's a lot to be said for flipped classes. Now I use some of my MOOCs in flipped classes at my local university, and it works very well. So I think there's, I just think it's, where I normally teach is at a commuter university, and sometimes, as you saw, there's heavy snow, students, and it's really expensive for students to have to drive to campus, and if you can reduce the number of times they have to come to campus by half by flipping your class, that's really valuable for students.
Yeah, we're seeing, and to me, this is just, it's a matter of time, and not very much time at that. I just was speaking to one of our partners. It's sort of a top 15 school in the country for sure, and he said that the presidents of the university, among the top 5 strategic priorities, one of them is reinventing pedagogy on campus through digital learning. Everybody is realizing, and one of our partners also called it a Trojan horse, that MOOCs have become a Trojan horse to reinvent the way classes are taught on campus. The way you start with learning outcomes, the way you chunk it up, the way you create the videos, the way you create the assessments. When you get the assessment, you don't just say it was wrong, you say, here's maybe what you got wrong. We have the ability in our courses now using machine learning where when someone's going through a course, we're watching what they're getting right and wrong, and before they take a high-stakes assessment at the end, we will say, this is going to be a little bit tough based on your experience so far, but other people who've struggled with the same things, these are the videos that they watched before passing that test as a personalized study guide. We have analytics for the professors. They can see how many times people get through this and where they drop off and which questions they're getting right. And if there's a certain question that people get all these questions right and then that one is wrong, maybe it's not the student, maybe it's the question. So the analytics and feedback that you can get as an instructor, let alone the way that you have to consciously think about how you design what you're trying to teach, is far more efficient in so many cases. Then it also frees it up so the students can learn in their dorm or on their own time. My daughter, she wants to be sleeping at 8 o'clock in the morning, not in a lecture hall. She'll probably be more rested to actually engage with the professor once she's done that. She can pause it, she can rewind, she can go to the bathroom, she can take notes. There's all kinds of things that you can do when you're asynchronous on videos that's just more effective. Not in every case, but I think what's going to happen is the time you spend with your professors on campus will be way, way more rich, and the efficiency with which you learn information will be much, much higher. So I think it's going to be a total reinvention of the way a lot of classes get taught. And I'm excited about that. Yeah.
So, to take the example of that sport person.
The javelin.
There, so that shows that the video was as effective as a coach to learn that sport. But it also shows that the person was extremely motivated to learn that. Is motivation a prerequisite for MOOC to work? Or is there any interaction between maybe the YouTube videos also motivated him to continue that path?
Mm-hmm.
Motivation is the gigantic question that researchers all over the world are trying to answer. How do you increase motivation, especially in someone who's just totally unmotivated? Mm-hmm. So that question I will have to punt on, because the best researchers in the world are still grappling with how do you motivate people. I do think John Hattie's research has, in effect sizes, has shown that the number one factor that impacts whether a person wants to succeed and is successful is the teacher efficacy. Mm-hmm. So it's the teacher themselves who is the can be an enormous motivator. And one thing that has surprised me is, for me, people don't even meet me, but they're somehow very encouraged by, they feel that it's a friend mm-hmm. who's helping them, and it doesn't actually need to be face-to-face, as I've found. But then it's funny, because when you meet them face-to-face, they feel like they already know you. Mm-hmm. But it's, it doesn't, you don't necessarily have to be face-to-face to be charismatic and to be influential in getting students, in helping motivate students.
The last thing I'll throw in, as with almost anything, it's a continuum, and different people need different things. We have a lot of folks on Coursera who are very motivated. They take all these MOOCs and they do great. And then there are other folks that they need more support. But there's a quote from Teach for America, which is, don't expect a child to learn until they say two things: I want to and I can. Some people intrinsically want to, and they feel very confident, maybe because of their past experience. Others less so. They'll need more support than those folks. And what's happening with MOOCs, the MOOCs are getting, in community colleges, are getting wraparound services. In Merit America, which is a nonprofit, they're wrapping services around the MOOCs that are social, they're face-to-face, they have coaches and mentors. So it's going to be a wide range of things. I do think as a core pedagogy, MOOCs are very powerful, and they can be wrapped with other support services for learners who need that. We're a little bit over time. I was reading the clock backwards, so thank you guys very much, and thanks again, Barb Oakley.
Okay, thank you.